What up, Drewskis? Andrew here from the Power of Drew. You know what? I'm starting getting a little old of the Andrew from the Power of Drew bit, right? Maybe I'll just let's let's just try saying "Hey, Drewskis" and going right into the thing, right? So here we'll do it right now. Ready? Hey Drewskis, with the sensor wars of Canon and Sony, full-frame cameras have been dropping in price, and it might get tempting to bypass some other cameras and go straight to full frame, especially with cameras like the RP out and stuff, right? But I think that there's many more factors you should be looking at than sensor size. And actually, I think sensor size should be very low on the list of things that you're considering. So that said, I got three things that I'm going to go over, or three sections that I think are important that we're going to discuss today. And it's going to help you out in your next buying decision. And that is cost of ownership, ecosystem, and power. So let's get in cost of ownership. So cost of ownership is essentially how much is the camera going to cost you over your time with the camera, right? And so that's past the initial cost of the body. And there's cameras out there that have a low body cost, but very expensive lens cost. So that all factors into cost of ownership. For example, the Panasonic S5 is a relatively cheap body. It comes in about $1,700, but the lenses, the L mount lenses, are actually pretty costly. And now I'll just like zip through B&H right here. Yep, looks pretty expensive, right? So that all factors into the cost of ownership, and I think it's something that you should be considering besides sensor size, because there's cameras out there, especially like the RP, that come in relatively cheap, but then the lenses, like those RF mounted lenses, cost a crap ton. So before you buy your next camera, do a little quick Google search and see how much the lenses are going to cost you before you jump into that body. Also, you want to look at things like batteries. How much are the batteries going to cost you? And also whatever memory card it takes, right? If that's CF Express or if that's SD cards. And if it's SD cards, make sure it takes what? V90, V60, V30. All those have different price points, and all those should factor in to your buying decision. Now, let's get into ecosystem. Ecosystem, much like cost of ownership, is pretty important, and essentially it's all the lenses and accessories made for the camera that you're looking at. And cameras that have more lenses for it and more accessories, I feel have a just better value than lenses that have fewer selections of lenses and accessories, right? And this is important because if you get a camera that has, let's say, 8 lenses for it and none of them really factor into what you're needing for a specific shot, then it might rope you into having to buy a different body or a different camera. And that's going to be increased cost, right? So before you go buy your other camera or a new camera, do your little search. Go out there on B&H or Adorama or K or something. Look at the lenses and accessories made for the camera, because surprisingly, newer cameras that have a newer form factor, that's the actual shape of the camera, the body of the camera, or cameras that have a new mount type, or even a worse scenario, ones that have a new body type and new mount type, will have fewer lenses made for it and fewer accessories made for it, meaning that the ecosystem is poorer in this sense, right? It has a smaller ecosystem. So I always encourage people to look for cameras that have a larger ecosystem, because I think that will bring them more value to their camera. And that's easy. Let's get into power. All right, power, my favorite subject, the power of the camera. That is like everything that's packed into that camera. And that means to me like IBIS, in-body image stabilization, right? You don't have to have it, but if you find yourself needing it, then get a camera with it versus a larger sensor. I mean, you can essentially get the same image with a camera with a smaller sensor versus a camera with a larger sensor, just as long as you have the lenses for it, right? A 12 to 35 f2.8 lens might not net you the same as a 24 to 70 f2.8 because you gotta times that crop factor. However, if you're needing a shot that requires a, let's say a 24 millimeter f2.8, then you can find a 12 millimeter f1.4 on micro four thirds, and that'll get you the same image, right? So bar none, as long as you know the lenses are out there, you can get the same image. However, what you can't get is stuff like 4K 120 or dynamic range, right? I actually feel dynamic range is one of the most important specs of a camera because I think the greater the dynamic range, the more powerful that camera is. So look for cameras that are having those numbers that equal like 13, 14, 15, 16. These are all high dynamic range numbers, and the greater the dynamic range, the better image you're going to come out with in areas where there's a great degree of like highlight and shadows going on. It's just going to be a better image for you. And surprisingly, larger sensors isn't necessarily directly proportional to high dynamic range, right? So the camera I'm shooting right now is the Canon C70. Yes, I got a Canon C70 recently. It's amazing. But it's on paper stating it has 16 stops of dynamic range. Whereas the Sony a7S III, another awesome camera, although I do think the C70 is a bit better. A really good camera too is quoting as having 15 stops of dynamic range. Regardless of the fact that the C70 is shooting on a Super 35 where the A70S III is shooting on a full frame, right? So just don't jump into a larger sensor thinking that by joining the full frame club, you know, you're just gonna have just a great image coming out of that thing, right? Because essentially a larger sensor might net you a initially, I guess, shallow depth of field, or might initially net you a better low light. If the camera has a good ecosystem, then potentially it'll have the lenses that will match, right, what a full frame lens might have, or full frame lenses might have. And because of that, we'll get you the low light. We'll get you a shallow depth of field, right? What it won't get you again, though, is the raw performance of the camera, right? Does that camera shoot raw? Does it have 10-bit, 422? These numbers I care about much, much more than how large the sensor is. Because surprisingly, I think there's just more cameras out there at a, more budget-friendly cost that might have smaller sensors than you might find in a larger sensor like a full frame counterpart. And if you don't agree with me, throw it down in the comments below. Let's duke it out. You know what I mean? I love a good argument. I'm not fishing for comments, but I really think these are good buying tips. And that's what I got for you guys, right? These are the main, I guess, the main subjects that I look for when I'm buying a new camera, and I just wanted to give you guys the same knowledge I have. Other than that, I got nothing else to say. I appreciate you all. I respect you guys so much. Subscribe and like and all that jazz, and I'll be seeing you all in the next one. Peace.